Since humanity began establishing political communities, men and women striving for greatness have pursued two opposite but related paths. One is a life of action in the arena of politics. The other is a life of reflection spent in the ivory tower of the academe. Among all our presidents, it was Gloria Macapagal Arroyo who was able to live in both worlds. Before entering the world of politics, she had an established academic career. And before becoming the second longest serving president of our country, she served our government in different capacities. Join us in our conversation about scholarship and statesmanship, the challenges she faced, and the lessons she learned as she led our republic for 10 straight years. I am Sasrogando Sasot, and this is Statecraft. Thank you, ma'am, for granting me this interview, and welcome to Statecraft.
Thank you for the honor of being interviewed by you.
Well, I won't, without much further ado, I would like to start this interview because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. First of all, ma'am, among at least our post-EDSA presidents, you are the only one who had considerable engagement with scholarship. You have a doctorate in economics. You held teaching positions before you joined the government in 1987, and you even helmed the economics department of Assumption College. How did your life in the ivory tower of scholarship help you prepare to lead our republic?
Well, my period of scholarship was a period when I was able to learn fundamentals for my coming work, which was governance. And I think I would put it in an analogy that people can understand easily. Sports, boxing.
That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah, because a boxer may have skills, the natural skills, and then a good trainer. So when he is naturally skillful and it's a good trainer, then you say he has good fundamentals. But even if it's good fundamentals, the day will come we will have to actually have a fight with an actual opponent in front of an actual audience.
Yes.
So the fundamentals are only half the battle.
Okay.
Because then you have the actuality there. So the same thing also with with governance in economics, for instance. So because I'm an economist, I had good fundamentals in economics. So I felt that I knew what economic decisions have to be made. For instance, the value-added tax expansion, that was an important and correct economic decision.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, that's only half the battle. I had to get done through the legislature,
yes.
And also I had to sell it to the Filipino people. So fundamentals are important. They help you. They're half the battle.
But did your life as an academe help you explain these things to the Filipinos better?
No. Well, the substance, yes. I knew what to explain, but how to explain it.
Okay. It's a different
That's the other thing, yeah. Because ivory tower academicians tend to talk to other
academes.
Yes.
Well, Henry Kissinger, who is also a scholar and statesman like yourself,
yes.
once said this, and this is a very long quote. I'm going to read this. As a professor, I was responsible primarily for coming up with the best answer I could divine. As a policymaker, I was also responsible for the worst that could happen. As a professor, the risk was that the important would drive out the urgent. As a policymaker, the risk was that the urgent would drive out the important. The policymaker lives in the world of the contingent. He or she must deal with partial answers that hopefully are on the road to truth. Contingent answers are always somewhat inadequate, but the attempt to achieve the ultimate in a finite period of time can produce extraordinary disasters. What do you think about what Kissinger said?
Well, Kissinger had...
Wait a minute, Mom, have you met Kissinger in person?
I did, yeah, I did. Okay. Well, he had years and years of earned wisdom.
Yes.
And so I think he tried to compress that into a single paragraph. That's why it's a very long paragraph,
Yes.
but it's packed with truth. So I think what he's trying to say is that the scholar lives in the world of the ideal, where time stands still. In economics we call that the equilibrium.
Yes.
And the equilibrium, you don't really know when it will really happen, but it describes the equilibrium state. But the statesman has to live in a dynamic real world, and he has to deal with people who may not exactly understand what he's trying to do. And that's not the word here and now. It's a very dynamic situation. And if a scholar makes a wrong decision, he can reboot the game.
Yes.
But if a statesman makes a wrong decision, lives are at stake. Lives can be at stake. So I think that's what Kissinger is trying to say.
When you were president.
And it's true.
When you were president, I'm sure you always find yourself in a situation wherein, there are urgent tasks to be done.
Yes.
And urgent crises to be resolved. And then you also have this scholarly background wherein, you have this ideal answer to everything.
Yes,
do you feel the tension?
Oh yes, the tension really exists. Many of my fellow scholars refuse to accept that it exists, but it does. It does exist. Because when you are in the field of theory, and then you have to enter the field of being a practitioner.
Yes.
The tension between theory
and practice
will affect your action when you're a practitioner in a way that political theorists may understand intellectually.
Yes.
But they'll never know it really until they really walk the shoes of a practitioner. So the most common effect on a practitioner is that sooner or later he or she will realize that he or she will rarely be able to implement the perfect solution.
Yes.
And he will have to function within that reality.
When you were
in fact, that's why they say politics is the art of the possible.
Yes. When you were president, ma'am, did you have conversation with your fellow academics? And then did you have debates about what's the best course of action to take? And did you successfully traverse this?
Well, I can't judge whether it was successful or not, but I always looked at the theory as the fundamental, the strategic to guide my action. But then in carrying out that action, which in theory was the correct thing to do, most of the time it has to be somewhat moderated by the reality that I'm carrying it out in.
Ma'am, as the second longest serving president of our country, what's the greatest lesson you learned about having the power to make decisions that impact the lives of millions of people and the generation that would come after them?
Well, rather than talk about the impact on generations and lives, let me talk about being in power for a long time.
Yes.
Okay? The longer you hold on to it, what's the impact? On the positive side, the longer you're in power, your ability to make tough decisions improves.
Okay.
Because you've learned how to handle the pressures of decision making.
Yes.
and you've acquired a better understanding of the political machinery and the people who run it. So to simplify, the longer you have exercised power, the easier it becomes to make decisions. That's the positive side. On the negative side, your circle of trusted advisors becomes smaller and smaller the longer you are in power. That's why, many people who've served in power for a very long time, people say they become isolated.
Yes.
So when you have a smaller and narrowing circle of advisors, then you also narrow the base of inputs.
Okay.
So when it's like that, then you have to go out of your way consciously to seek new sources of inputs. And the other thing also, the longer you're in power, the more you have to guard against the temptation of hubris.
I think everyone who's in power, that's always a temptation.
But the longer, the more.
The more. Ma'am, what for you is the biggest misconception people have about being president, and why?
People think that a president can do what he or she wants simply by giving orders to government officials. That's because they don't really understand. Most people don't understand the way the government really works and how power operates within our society. So that's the biggest misconception.
Even though that you're president, you cannot always do what you want. Okay.
It's a magic wand, and you just wave it and it happens.
And it's not really the case.
No.
Ma'am, as president, you are bombarded by tons of information day after day. I think especially you, because you face a lot of crises during the time. How did you deal with them? And were you methodical in sorting out which type of issues require urgent attention, or were you more like a play it by ear kind of president?
No, you have to be more methodical. First, you have to learn how to deal with or be willing to work hard in dealing with this large volume of information. In other words, you cannot be lazy. Well, I wasn't lazy. Second, it's very good to have a team that has the collective experience to be able to discern what you said earlier, what's really important and what's truly urgent, the one that Kissinger said.
Yes.
And so, the more experienced your team is, the better they can discern and give you your advice. And then third, you have to have an organized, disciplined, solid information system. So when you have the solid information system and information infrastructure at your disposal, if that is your foundation, then the president can be more of the play-it-by-ear kind of president because you have that solid information infrastructure.
So you can be both, but
you can be both, but you cannot be totally play-it-by-ear. You need to have the solid information. You need to be, to be hardworking enough to deal with so much information, and you need a team that can help you discern the urgent from the merely important.
So what guided you in selecting your team?
I said it in the beginning. I said, I'm going to select a team that is a blend of youth and experience.
Okay. Is it because you would like people to have fresh ideas and at the same time the wisdom to know what can be done?
Yes. My father always used to tell me, not always, but many times, reasoning, and we are both scholars, reasoning can many times mislead you, but experience never.
That's a very good advice. That's a very good advice. So you have kept on to that.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
okay.
So not just my experience, even the experience of the people around me.
Ma'am, they say that every president has a defining crisis. What do you think was yours?
I think mine was the Angelo de la Cruz crisis of 2004.
Okay.
If you remember, in 2001 when 9/11 happened, I proved to be one of the strongest allies of America.
Yes.
And then 2004, what happened? The Iraqi insurgents kidnapped Angelo de la Cruz and said that they would behead him unless I withdrew the Philippines military contingent. from Iraq.
That's kind of a difficult decision.
Yes,
to make.
very difficult decision, but at stake was the life of one of our OFWs. And remember, we keep saying that they are the national heroes. So here was my chance to make that a reality. I mean, the recognition of reality. And I think America was bitterly disappointed with my decision, and that set a turbulent tone in my administration after 2004.
But that's kind of a bold and courageous decision to make, because especially that it was a very pivotal time for the world and for U.S. foreign policy.
Yes, yes.
But what made you decide, besides that there is one person at stake, with you knowing that the United States might not really fully welcome this decision?
Well, because the most important thing for me would be the Filipino people.
Were there people who advised you not to?
Oh, there was a very, very strong debate.
Okay.
I remember they were debating about it in the cabinet when we were watching the television. We were watching the threat being made by the insurgents, and there was a very big debate. What do we do with it? And then I went. So they, one of my cabinet members used to say that when you debate so much, sometimes you debate to the point it becomes analysis to paralysis.
Yes, yes.
So when they were debating, I went first to my room, and then I decided that I'm going to save his life. So I went on television. So I did.
Yes.
I made a decision, because you cannot keep debating and debating. You have to make a judgment call, and I did.
Ma'am, this is one of these instances wherein you really make you feel that you're in a situation wherein you decide who to live and who to die. How does it feel?
Remember I said before,
yes.
if you make a mistake, people's lives may be...
exactly. How does it feel being in that kind of situation?
Well, it's a very difficult situation, and that's when you have to make a decision. I think I would, I would make a decision. My decision would always be as much as possible to save a life.
When should a president bow down to public opinion, and when should she or he ignore it?
I think a president should never ignore public opinion.
Okay.
No need, he or she may not have to bow to it, but at least never ignore it. And if public opinion is contrary to what the president believes to be the best for the country, then he must do remedial measures like safety nets or information campaigns to backstop the implementation of the decision. Now you ask me, when do you bow to public opinion?
Yes.
Only when the underlying decision is the best one for the country. So that makes me a theorist after all.
But have you ever found yourself in a situation wherein you had to make a decision that's not fully acceptable to the public?
Well, I mentioned earlier about the value-added tax.
Yes.
It's never popular to raise taxes.
Never
Yes.
popular.
Yeah, but it had to be done because, being an economist, I knew that if we were not going to reform our revenue system, down the road, we would become bankrupt.
And I think we're benefiting from your
We are benefiting. Before my administration, the Philippines was always in a boom and bust cycle.
Okay.
After my reforms, never again up to this day, never had a boom and bust cycle. In my administration, I was the first one to have 38 quarters of growth, never negative. But after me, everybody enjoyed that same record.
And I think the fundamentals that you've learned in your
Because of the fundamentals, yes.
Yes, I think that's where your life of scholarship helped.
That's right. I was at home with the decisions I had to make. It's not somebody who told me you have to have increase your revenue base. I knew it.
Because you studied it, and
Yes,
then
yes.
I think that's when the life in the academe really helped you, because in the academe you have this time to reflect on a lot of things, and then when you're already there to make that decision,
Yes.
you already had that long time
Except
to
that
reflect.
you know what decision to make, but the context in which you have to carry out your decision is the reality that you
Yes.
have to deal with, and being a scholar is not enough.
You have to have years
to
of
be a
practice.
practitioner.
But
Yeah.
you've been the thing about you, ma'am, is that you just didn't suddenly rise into power. You were a cabinet member, you ran for senator, you were vice president, and then you were president. So you had this experience of being a
Yes.
practitioner.
That's right. That's right.
Ma'am, this is, I think, my second to the last question.
Okay.
For an international scholar like me, I believe and sincerely believe that you should be given credit in the way you handled both our country's relationship with China and the United States.
Thank you.
What lessons you would like to impart to countries that share that same geopolitical positions as the Philippines, situated in the so-called buffer zone between two superpowers?
I think the most basic lesson is that perhaps slightly more statesmanship is required than scholarship, more practice than theory. And let me just add about China. I recall sometime 35 years ago when China was a sleeping dragon, economic dragon, and beginning to awake. And in the Philippines, everybody was afraid that, if China becomes rich, then it will be our rival in the region.
Yeah.
At that time, it was not yet obvious to one and all that China was a class all its own. Now, 35 years later, we see China is not our competitor in the region. China is a collaborator, a donor, and a market.
So, did you study Chinese politics?
Yes,
okay.
I did. I used to be I was a founder of together with others, of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding.
Okay, so
I went to China when people were not allowed to go to China.
okay, so was it before you were president?
Oh, long even before I entered politics.
Oh, before
Yeah,
politics.
yeah. I was a student in the University of the Philippines.
But this is really interesting, because this is very important when you make decision in, my foreign policy. Professor told us that in order to make foreign policy, you need to know the country that's going to be the subject of your foreign policy, and I think it's very reassuring and very reassuring to know that during the time that you were making this decision, it was an informed one.
I hope.
Very informed.
I like to think so.
And I think, ma'am, final question. I think this is a question that I ask to all my guests. If you could have the power to change one thing in world history, what would it be and why?
That until the last few years of our world's history, if you remember, of course, you know that you're a student of history too, the East was more civilized, more cultured,
Definitely.
more scientifically advanced than the West.
Yes.
But then, the West proved bolder, more willing to explore, more willing to challenge orthodoxy, while the East remained complacent in its superiority. So the rest is modern history. So if I could change history for the better, for the betterment of the world, the change I would have wanted is for the East to have been equally dynamic as the West. Because with the dynamism of the West, driven by the West, look at what happened in the last 200 years. Fantastic development, economic and social progress has been extraordinary. So if the East had added its drive and energy to the West, what would have happened would not have been only extraordinary, it would have been breathtaking.
It's a very interesting answer to the question, because for an economist, it's really fitting for you to say that. Thank you so much, President
Thank
Gloria
you
Macapagal
too.
for your time, and I